Yeah, we've been talking about these shifting justifications depending on which administration official you talk to, and the comment from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Here is how he framed things when speaking to reporters yesterday, a message, by the way, House Speaker Mike Johnson then echoed a short time later.
There absolutely was an imminent threat, and the imminent threat was that we knew that if Iran was attacked, and we believed they would be attacked, that they would immediately come after us. And we were not going to sit there and absorb a blow before we responded, because the Department of War assessed that if we did that, if we waited for them to hit us first after they were attacked, and by someone else, Israel attacked them, they hit us first, and we waited for them to hit us, we would suffer more casualties and more deaths. We went proactively in a defensive way to prevent them from inflicting higher damage. Had we not done so, there would have been hearings on Capitol Hill about how we knew that this was going to happen, and we didn't act preemptively to prevent more casualties and more loss of life.
They had to evaluate the threats to the U.S., to our troops, to our installations, to our assets in the region and beyond, and they determined, because of the exquisite intelligence that we had, that if Israel fired upon Iran and took action against Iran to take out the missiles, then they would have immediately retaliated against U.S. personnel and assets. We have troops in harm's way, and we have many Americans in the region, and that was of great concern. If we had waited for all of those eventualities to take place, the consequences of inaction on our part could have been devastating. We don't know at what magnitude, but you can assume, because it is common sense, that if Iran had begun to fire all of their missile arsenal, short and mid-range missiles, at our personnel and our assets and our installations, we would have suffered staggering losses.
I mean, they can't
Willie,
be serious.
I recognize that look in their eyes. That was a look that I would have when I was in college and my professor was asking me my take on the Odyssey. And I said, exquisite writing. And then I would ramble. Those were two of the stupidest answers I've ever heard in my life.
I'm embarrassed.
Marco Rubio just said of Israel that they were the preeminent threat. The preeminent threat was Israel attacking Iran. So we had to attack Iran. Hey, sir, why did you walk into the bar and punch the bartender in the face? Because my friend was about to do that. So I had to punch him because I knew after my friend punched him, he was going to. This makes no sense. It certainly makes no sense geopolitically. It's just stupid. If this is, I can't imagine justifications for the war being stupid. They were doing much better just saying they're the epicenter of terror since 1979. They had to be taken out. But this is getting insane now.
Yeah.
It is, and it also flies in the face of everything we know. That wasn't like Israel was suddenly freelancing and snuck up on the United States who was going to do it. We have our own deep reporting. The New York Times has an extensive piece this morning about Prime Minister Netanyahu lobbying Donald Trump for months and months and months leading up to this day, how they picked the day, completely in concert with Israel. So the United States knew exactly what was happening and what Israel was thinking. But to your larger point, this is not what the president has said. This is not what other officials have said. They said there was an imminent threat to the United States. President Trump said that, meaning they had long-range missiles, he suggested yesterday, that could reach the United States. Most people say that is not true. Most experts, even administration insiders, say that's not true. The other rationale we heard is that they were on the brink, Steve Witkoff said on Saturday, a week away from getting the nuclear material they would need to make a nuclear bomb. Most experts, most insiders say that's also not true.
Willie, by the way, I'm a week away. But Willie, I just want you to know right now, I am a week away from qualifying for the Masters this year. So there you go. No, none of this makes Willie. I mean, this is the most. I think this is the most significant decision we've made to go to war since 2003, when George W. Bush decided to go to war in Iraq, and they can't even get their justification for that war. They can't. I mean, not only
their story straight, they can't get their story straight.
And anybody needs to get them together, Willie, because we're looking stupid in front of the world right now.
Yeah, those were not reassuring performances, shall we say, by the Secretary of State and Speaker of the House. And this is deadly, deadly serious stuff. obviously. 6 American service members are dead and many more across the region. So the comments we just played for you from Rubio and Johnson contradict earlier reporting from Reuters, citing 2 people familiar with the matter who say Trump administration officials acknowledged in closed-door briefings with congressional staff there was no intelligence suggesting Iran planned to attack United States forces first. Iran's foreign minister responded to Secretary Rubio, writing on social media, he, quote, admitted what we all knew. The U.S. has entered a war of choice on behalf of Israel. There was never any so-called Iranian threat. That's from the foreign minister of Iran, Kadi K. And obviously now, in some ways, Europe has its eye on this war, being drawn in some ways as well. What is the reaction there to this step by the United States and Israel, and to the scramble to find a justification for it?
Well, I guess now we know why it was called the Department of War, not the Department of Defense, because there seems to be, and that's the perception, I've just returned from Munich, Germany last night, there seems to be a perception in Europe that this is an administration that is set on this kind of gunfire operations where it can go in and take out leaders. It worked in Venezuela, as you've been pointing out. It might not work here. But we know from Iraq how important it is to have a clear rationale, to have a clear reason, and to articulate that both to the American people and to the rest of the world. Because if you don't, if the reasons keep changing, it was because Israel was going to attack, it was because we were under imminent threat, then you undermine confidence in other countries around the world. And other countries around the world will then start to say, well, what do we need to do now to secure our own defense? What do we need to do to have our own mechanisms for defense? And you know what they start doing? They start looking at the countries that are not being attacked. Russia is not being attacked. China is not being attacked. North Korea is not being attacked. And you quickly get into a position where people start thinking it's not just that we have to have a common defense. We've got the Europeans at the moment talking about more common defense and even more common nuclear defense. I think that's the danger here, is that if people don't trust America to have clear reasons to act in a way that is rational, with global interests at heart, do we quickly start spiraling into a world that is less safe because people go for maximalist defense positions of their own?
We want to bring in defense editor at The Economist, Shashank Joshi, and David Ignatius has the first question for you, sir. David?
So, Shashank, you follow defense matters as well as anybody that I read. Be interested in your assessment of this war, 3-4 days in, whether this is stretching out to a long war, whether you hear concerns from Gulf countries and others who are involved in it, what you think the widening effects will likely be. But just give us your sense of how this war is going and whether the Iranians are fighting with more than you would have thought.
Yeah, good morning, David. Good morning, everyone. I think the interesting thing is you've articulated in the last 15 minutes how difficult it is to understand the war aims here, because they were initially articulated as being setting the conditions for regime change in Iran. And I was confident that that is a campaign that would take multiple weeks. That's not something done in a few days. What we heard yesterday from Dan Kane, from Secretary Rubio, from Secretary Hegseth, others, was a very, very different set of aims, narrowly focused around Iran's missile program. Now, that, I think, can be done in a shorter period of time. They can degrade missile stockpiles. We've already heard the Israelis say they have destroyed about half of the Iranian missile launches that Iran's able to bring to bear. And I think you could have really long-lasting and severe damage done to Iran's missile program by the end of this week. There's no doubt about it. But the problem is, you would still have an Iran led by individuals who are more hardline in some respects than the leaders who have been killed by the strikes so far. You have, a new leader of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, General Vahidi. Who is this man? Well, David, as you know, he is a former head of the Quds Force, the expeditionary arm of the IRGC. He was associated with the bombing of a Jewish cultural center in Argentina in the 1990s. This is not a regime that will be more moderate, more pragmatic, more deterred than that of Ayatollah Khamenei. And so I still think at the end of this week, even though enormous damage may have been done to Iran's missile program, including the supply chain, the explosives, the guidance systems, you will still have the political problem sitting in Iran of a regime that casts this incredible and ominous missile shadow over the Persian Gulf. And I think the Trump administration will find it very hard to articulate that and frame that as some kind of decisive win.
Shashank, as you point out, President Trump, even when announcing these strikes on Saturday morning, said, we have taken out the top leadership. Now, Iranian people, it is your turn to step in and fill the void and create a democratic country. We know many of you hate the regime. Go do this. He was speaking to a population of largely young people, unarmed young people, going up against the IRGC and these commanders who very much continue the legacy of the supreme leader. So how reasonable, how plausible, if at all, is it to expect now that with the supreme leader and others dead, that this movement can come back when just over a month ago they did take to the streets and thousands of them were killed?
Look, I think the movement can come back. This regime has lost all legitimacy. It's hollowed out. It's hated by the people. There's no doubt about that. But no one is going to come out while the bombs are falling. You know, none of us would come out onto the streets in those circumstances. In fact, President Trump told them not to. He said, wait till I'm finished. Now, the other problem is that some of these strikes so far have targeted the state security apparatus, right? So Israeli strikes have hit Basij headquarters across the country. The Basij, of course, are the paramilitary organization that did lots of the repression a few months ago. They have struck IRGC bases in different parts of the country. But I think the focus of these first 3 days of operations have been on Iran's missile forces, Iran's navy, and nuclear and missile sites, as well as political leadership. I think if you are going to give the Iranian people the confidence to say, if we go back onto the streets in a week's time and we want confidence we are not going to be gunned down in the same way, I think what you'd need to see is an Israeli and American set of strikes over the next 4 or 5 days that systematically break down Iran's domestic security apparatus. I think that is a very hard thing to do, and I think that President Trump will face the dilemma between doing that and upholding his commitment to the Iranian people that he has made and sucking himself into a longer campaign. But look, he should remember the case of George W. Bush, H.W. Bush in 1991, who, as you will recall, David and others, called upon the Iraqi people to rise up in 1991 after the first Gulf War, and the Shias in the south and the Kurds in the north did so, and they were massacred by Saddam Hussein. That should be, I think, a very, very cautionary tale for American strategy today.